Oh, Paime says, what Texas thing? Well, the Texas thing is apparently there's some upcoming changes to how education is going to be done in Texas, and there's some Republican lawmakers that have some issues with that. Specifically, there's going to be a bit of a change where you have to point out that, like, white supremacy is bad, and Republican lawmakers don't want that change for some reason. I don't know why you would not want a teacher to tell a child that white supremacy is bad. I don't know what mentality you would have to fight against that, but Texas is Texas, and this is the place that tries to secede from the Union like every fucking 4 years. So, anyways, before we get into that, let's go ahead and get into the fan art section for the episode. We have a piece from Godless Journey with the Unblinking One. And honestly, I am surprised that this meme has not died yet on the channel. But maybe there's a reason it hasn't. I do blink, though. Every once in a while, I do blink. Anywho, thank you very much for the fan art, Godless Journey. Oh, we actually have one more from them as well. We'll go ahead and open up that second one since it's two from the exact same person. It is a hammer, an unblinking hammer. Apparently, even the hammer is going to be staring at you in your sleep. As always, whenever you submit, if you want to submit fan art, the best way to do it is dropping it into the fan art section of the Discord. As always, thank you very much for your fan art submissions. And with that said, let's go ahead and read something incredibly disappointing. So this has just been dropped on me, so I'm going to go ahead and say, forgive me for not coming to this with a lot of prepared commentary. This is something that's literally being dropped on me in the middle of the stream. But I do think it's important to talk about, so we're going to go ahead and talk about that real quick after I pop my neck again. So, apparently, there's a Texas Senate bill that seeks to strip required lessons on people of color and women from critical race theory law. Okay. So, Texas lawmakers have filed at least 3 bills targeting how racism and current events of the country's founding principles are taught in K-12 schools, including a Senate bill that would strip out upcoming requirements that students need to learn that white supremacy is morally wrong and study particular writings by women and people of color. So, what is wrong with having children read books or poems or literally anything written by women or people of color? I would say nothing. What's wrong with teaching that white supremacy is morally wrong? I would say nothing. But if you are a politician and you're trying to say that these are things that we don't want taught to our children, then I would say maybe you should stop being in politics and you should just go put on your fucking wizard hat. But since I'm not saying that, let's go ahead and look at the rest of the article here. Senate Bill 3 in Texas features more changes than 2 House bills that have been filed for the special legislative sessions that began on Thursday. The legislation comes after Governor Greg Abbott signed into law a bill from this year's regular legislative session that restricts how current events and America's history of racism can be taught in Texas schools. He says it's been commonly referred to as the critical race theory bill, though the term critical race theory never appears in it. In signing it, Abbott said more must be done to abolish critical race theory in Texas, and later put the issue on his special session agenda. So this is kind of fucking stupid, alright? Because critical race theory is not what's being taught in these schools. Critical race theory is literally a legal structural analysis that lets you determine whether or not racial iniquity was used as a determining factor in a systemic way. That's it. So, like, I've said it in a previous video, and I'll say it again. Let's say that we happen to have, we have a banker, right? And this is in the 30s, okay? And the straw man is that critical race theory is going to determine whether or not the banker is racist. But that's not what's being determined here. Nobody cares if the banker is racist as far as CRT is concerned. What CRT is going to do is look at the banker and say, okay, so he's determining whether or not a loan is going to be given out to an African-American male. This African-American male happens to be in the middle of a red-lined district, a district that has been redlined in the 1930s, and it was redlined because these were the areas that were impoverished, because realistically around that time, poverty and racial lines were almost the exact same fucking thing, especially because of Jim Crow laws. We had legal segregation everywhere. So the bank denies this person a loan. And when the bank denies this person a loan, they are unable to gain a house outside of the red-lined zone, forcing them to stay in the red-line zone. So that they have a new, when a new generation is born unto them, and they try to get a loan for a house elsewhere, they find themselves once again inside the red-line zone. That's where they grew up, and they are unable to afford housing outside of it because the bank is still not giving them a loan because they are inside the red-line zone. Is the banker who is denying them these opportunities, these loans, racist? CRT doesn't care. What it cares about is that the loans were effectively denied on racial lines. Now, were they denied on racial lines via paper? No, they were denied on geographical lines and on financial ones. Well, you're a financial risk, and you live in a high-risk area. The risk is too high for the bank to take. That sounds reasonable, except for the fact that the underlying principle that all of that was established on was on redlining, meaning that it ends up being a racial thing anyway. This is how you determine the systemic issue of racism in specifically the category of granting loans, how banks operate. CRT looks at this. Critical race theory takes this idea and it says, okay, let's see if there was a racial component at any point that can still be felt today, or still be felt up to a certain point. What it's not doing is determining whether or not things are racist, whether or not people are racist. It is determining if there was a racial lens that was utilized at one point in a system. That is how systemic analysis works. That's how critical race theory works. Moving on in the article, pretty much repeating the exact same thing I fucking said, so I gotta just shut my fucking mouth. Teachers and experts say that critical race theory is an academic framework used to determine structural cases of racial iniquity. It is not being taught in K-12 schools, and that phrase is being used as a catch-all for any mention of racism, which is an integral part of the teaching of history, truthfully. Critical race theory itself critiques the focus on individual blame in contemporary discussions of racism, and shifts the focus to legal and social systems that perpetuate inequity. True. So, what conservatives seem to be using critical race theory to mean is blaming individual white people for the problems black people face. That's not what CRT does. And if you don't think that that's what conservatives are pushing, seriously, look up CRT on YouTube. You will find Ben Shapiro, you will find Mark Walsh, you will find Mark Dice, you will find, or Matt Walsh, you will find Mark Dice, you will find all of them saying the same goddamn shit about how CRT is a plague in the United States because it blames individual white people for things, and it says that black people can't grow as people in the U.S. because they are constantly oppressed. That's not what CRT says. CRT cares about systems. It doesn't care about people. Is CRT an American thing? Yes, CRT is largely an American thing because we had the history of Jim Crow. We have the history of racial segregation. We have the history of racially divided slavery in the United States, and it is such a heavy part of our founding, and it is such a recent part in our history that, yes, there are legal frameworks that have to take these things into consideration because there are people alive today who lived through Jim Crow. That's the reason why this ends up being a very American-centric theory, because it's literally analyzing systems within America. By and large, anyway. The law that already passed lists documents, figures, and events that must be included in the social studies curriculum. But SB 3, filed by Senator Brian Hughes on Friday, strips out most of the mentions of women and people of color in that section. Why? No, seriously, why? What is the benefit of this? More than 24 requirements that include Native American history, work by civil rights activists Cesar Chavez and Dolores Utera, historical documents related to the Chicano movement and women's suffrage, and writings by Martin Luther King, Susan B. Anthony, and Frederick Douglass. These are all things that have been stripped out as of the, or these are things that are trying to be stripped out by Bill SB3. Now, who the fuck is Brian Hughes? I'm not familiar with this person. Okay, so he is a Republican Party official. He is on the State of Affairs. He's in the Committee of Education, Jurisprudence, Natural Resources and Economic Development, Nominations, Redistricting. Okay, cool. Salary, $72,000. So that's 7,200. Is that 7,200 a month? That'd be really weird if that was per year. Pretty sure that's per month. But okay, so we actually know who it is. Now, let's continue on here. So it also removes the requirement to teach the history of white supremacy, including but not limited to the institution of slavery, the eugenics movement, and the Ku Klux Klan, and the ways in which it is morally wrong. So, wait, why would you not want this stuff taught? This stuff is all very important to United States history. We had a history of white supremacy. Hell, fuck, I'm living in Georgia. We still do have that shit here. We have a history of slavery. The eugenics movement was popular here. The Nazis literally, like, copied a bunch of our shit to do the stuff that they did in their camps. A lot of their experiments were modeled after stuff that was popular over here. Not teaching that stuff to children is to teach them that it can't happen here. As opposed to teaching them the more correct stance, which is, please be vigilant. Hughes, a Mineola Republican, did not respond to a request for comment this week. Many of the items his bill would strip were added by House Democrats during the regular legislative session, but were not part of the bill when the Senate originally passed the legislation earlier this year. In his agenda for the special session, Abbott said he wanted legislation that resembled that earlier Senate version. Okay, so this one is a little bit different. So, like, yes, I do think all these things need to be taught, and yes, legislating that they need to be part of our curriculums is perfectly fine. I'm okay with that. But if these things were not part of the original bill, that in and of itself raises some questions, but I'm not 100% certain how all of those things tend to work. And if this is, like, an okay thing to do, generally speaking. I don't know. Kevin Ellis, the chair of the State Board of Education, wrote in an email to the Texas Tribune that most of the items in this section of the new law are already included in the state educational standards, which are referred to as Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills. But Ellis said some of the items in the new law would require, and that SB 3 seems to walk back, aren't currently required in schools. Okay, yeah, that's literally what they're trying to do, though. They're trying to require them in schools. Jesus Christ. Some of the items that are not currently included in our TEKS... No. No. No, I did not let them out. I don't know how many times I have to say it. State Representative James, hold on. Some of the items that are not included in our text are the writings on Ona Judge and Sala Hennings, Thomas Jefferson's letter to the Danbury Baptist, as well as the Ninth Circuit decision in Mendez versus Westminster. I'm actually not familiar with Thomas Jefferson's letter. Hold on, let's check this one real quick. Thomas Jefferson's writings to members in the Danbury Baptist. Oh, this is where he wanted to create a wall of a separation of church and state. This is not part of Texas education. The fucking separation of church and state is apparently not part of Texas education. Oh man, that explains so much and yet so little. That explains so fucking much and yet so fucking little. State Representative James Talicro, who was a major opponent of the bill, already signed into law and had successfully blocked the Senate's original version of the earlier bill from passing, expressed dismay over that version now being revived. The amendments the House added were essential to ensure that we were teaching students all of American history, the good, the bad, and the ugly, the Round Rock Democrat said. They were put in place to ensure the teachers wouldn't be punished for telling their students the truth, and if we were to strip them, it could see teachers across the state of Texas being silenced. It is a frightening dystopian future that starts to come into focus, he added. State Representative Steve Toth, who authored the regular session's critical race theory bill, said lawmakers wanted to strip those provisions because they wanted the list to be smaller and a bit more truncated. Okay, but why? The mission was to get back to the original list, which was more along the lines of America's founding documents, and to make it a manageable list. Okay, none of that stuff's unmanageable. Like, literally, every one of those concepts can be taught over the course of 2 fucking days. Like, you're not going to be able to read a bunch of books in that amount of time, but you can go over a lot of that stuff, like, really quick. Really easy. He said that the bill represents a minimum list of things to have to be read. It is not an exhaustive list. If it's not on the list, it's not like a teacher can't bring it up, he said. State Representative Carl Sherman, another House Democrat who added amendments, said that the removal of people of color amounted to them being whitewashed from our history. If I had put in an amendment that Sam Houston should be included, I'm sure there would be no opposition to that, said the DeSoto Democrat. Not wrong. Hector Bajorquez is the Director of Operations and Educational Practice for the Intercultural Development Research Association and a member of the Texas Legislative Equity Coalition. He said that the material SB 3 seeks to cut could give teachers some protection, and a sigh of relief that they could address things like white supremacy explicitly. He says that the rest of the bill creates an atmosphere of fear and uncertainty, making it harder for teachers to teach about racism truthfully. So, again, this is outside of my scope of knowing, like, what is the norm in the classroom. I kind of wish that I actually had my teacher, Mr. Novotny, here to help me go over this particular article. But it is true that by having, like, a clause that you have to say the white supremacy is wrong, it does cement things going forward. It prevents you from having a teacher who, like, will randomly just talk about the glory of the white race one day. Like, it does help with that, and I don't think there's anything wrong with having that as, like, a requirement. I don't. If it's not explicitly stated that we can talk about white supremacy with our students, then we're bound to repeat it, especially when you have too many people out there saying there's no such thing as white supremacy. Even though the bill wouldn't ban any teaching, specifically omitting writings from and lessons on women and people of color, it plainly sends a message to students, Bajorquez said. It basically says we don't care about you or your histories. It tells our students that they're not important. It sends our teachers even further into uncertainty. Okay. So, I do like the idea. I also hate... I hate this. I know this. There's a reason this was an unused song. I am so sorry, Masato Nakamura. There's a reason the song was not used in Sonic 2. It's gone. It's gone. Just... Anyway, so... I do not... as I've said before, I don't think there's anything wrong with having a curriculum and then having a legal requirement of the curriculum to go over pieces from people of color, to go over the nasty history of the United States. Especially when we see so many textbooks do things like whitewash the Trail of Tears. It would seem to me that there's a concerted effort in the educational system to try to whitewash American history. And I don't think that that's a good thing to do. I just don't. Says lower chambers new bills. Meanwhile, the Special Sessions House Bill 178 walks back a couple of the more controversial aspects of the new law. The original bill said that social studies teachers can't be compelled to discuss current events or widely debated or currently controversial issues of public policy or social affairs. It says that if they do, they need to explore the topic from a diverse and contending perspectives without giving deference to any one perspective. HB 178 would let districts require teachers to discuss current events, but it would leave in place the requirement that no one perspective be given deference. It also expands its requirements from social studies teachers to all instructors, and HB 178 would also extend to all K-12 teachers prohibitions on requiring or incentivizing students' political activism and teaching that one race or sex is inherently superior to another race or sex. It also removes a provision that teachers can't require an understanding of the 1619 Project, a series by the New York Times that examines how racism has shaped United States history. Okay, so the 1619 Project is a fairly contentious thing. It doesn't get everything right, but by and large, a lot of the stuff that's said in it is fairly accurate. But I am okay with not necessarily requiring a full understanding of it. Because it's not... Unless they wanted to say, like, what are the problems with it and what are the good things with it. But I don't know. There's been... Whenever I read about the 1619 Project, I always read, like, at the exact same time that there are certain professionals whose job is American history, who say that, like, yeah, most of it's right, but there's some stuff that's just flat out wrong. But, continuing on. Toth said that he removed that explicit ban because the new law already prohibits certain aspects he attributed to that work, such as the idea that the advent of slavery in the territory that is now the United States constituted the true founding of the United States. One provision in the new law prohibits teaching that slavery and racism are anything other than deviations from, betrayals of, or failures to live up to the authentic founding principles of the United States, which include liberty and equality. Toth said that should counter accusations that we're whitewashing history, or that we're not talking about history, or that we're not addressing history and the wrongs of history or the evils of the past, since the bill actually encourages us to look at history. Okay, so the difference in these two framings, it's fairly explicit. In one framing, the framing from, like, the 1619 Project, that framing views American history as a place that was founded on slavery, and we eventually broke out of it, and we are slowly working our way into being better versions of ourselves. We were abusive at our core, and we still have a lot of that stuff to go through, and America's going through therapy. That's kind of the idea there, and I largely agree with that. The idea proposed here, the one that I don't agree with, is the idea that slavery and racial inequality and all these things were actually failures and betrayals of the authentic founding principles of the United States. I don't agree with this one here. The founding principles of the United States, like, we literally were founded on slavery. One of the reasons we broke away from the UK was to maintain having slaves. Even George Washington, the way he kept a lot of his slaves was he would do a fucking doublespeak thing where Massachusetts would have a law that said that slaves had to be freed if they stayed in Massachusetts for a single year. Like, if they were citizens of Massachusetts for a year, he would literally move his slaves to a different state halfway through the year and then move them up so that they were only ever on his plantation 6 to 8 months at a time. And it allowed him to circumvent that law. George Washington, dude who founded the fucking United States, literally loopholed laws to make sure that he could keep his slaves as long as humanly possible. Like, to say that it was not baked into our founding is to literally deny how the fuck history happened. So I think that this framing is a little more accurate than the one being proposed. It's just me. The bill would also require teachers to disclose all of their teaching materials and activities online every month. If you're going to teach something, just let parents know about it, Toth said. So the problem I have with this one here, like, yeah, teachers should be able to show their materials to the parents. That is perfectly fine. That should be public knowledge. But I have to sometimes wonder why. Like, let's say that let's say that you were taught that America is the best country in the entire world and it's perfect, and you're not a good patriot if you don't agree with that. And then a teacher goes through an entire course in an ethics course, how you're going to go over the ways in which America does not live up to those principles of which it apparently espouses, and the pathway forward in which we can make America achieve that. And some parent's gonna get fucking pissy at that. And freak the fuck out because, oh my god, you're not being a real patriot, you're horrible. But the reality is, like, no, they're actually teaching your child to be more patriotic. They're teaching them to be introspective. That's an issue that I see with that, but I don't disagree with letting parents know about the things you're going to be teaching in the class either. I just hate when that happens, and I know there's going to be some Karen who does that. I fucking know that. But I'm hoping that my mic didn't just freeze. Did the mic freeze? Because I'm on Streamlabs, everything just fucking froze for a second. And I don't know why it did. That scares me. Okay, mic seems to be good here. If you're going to teach something, listen. Okay, so State Representative Jasmine Crockett, a Dallas Democrat, filed House Bill 216, which would remove the ban on requiring or incentivizing students' political activism and political advocacy. Toth said he expects the legislation that ends up passing during the special session will look more like his bill. Okay, so I'm going to be honest. I am of the opinion that everyone should at some point be compelled in some way via a classroom or what have you to engage in politics. I do. Because I think everybody should vote. And not only do I think everybody should vote, I think everybody should be able to make informed votes. Should know why they're voting for the things they're voting for. And honestly, the only reason that I even, started learning any of this stuff is because I took an elections class when I was in 6th grade. That's also where I learned how to debate initially. Because in 6th grade, that was during the Bush versus Cheney election, so Brown Bars Middle School allowed us to take an elections class where we studied that election, and we studied the history of the Democratic and Republican Party. That's where I determined I was a Republican for the first time, because it was the party of Lincoln. Literally, those are my reasons. So, I engaged with this stuff as a kid. And I think everybody else should at some point. If you want them to grow up to be informed voters, then don't shield them from politics until they're adults. That's fucking stupid. At some point, ideally middle or high school, teach them about the political process. Get them engaged in some type of political activism, political advocacy, or at least political study. It's boring, it's stupid, but it is literally the stuff that runs the country. But, regardless, said U.S. government was a required course in high school for us. But the thing is, I don't want just a class that talks about what the difference between an oligarchy and a republic is. Because when I took a government class, that's what it was. When I took elections, we had to learn how to debate. We had to learn party platforms. I think that more emphasis on that should be pushed in at least high school. At least high school. And not just in electives. That's just me. I want everybody to be an informed voter. I want more people voting, and I want more people voting with a decent head screwed on. That's what I want. But, that all said, we are done covering the bills that are popping out of Texas. Not as worrying as I thought they would be, but still a little worrying when you consider the, we actually don't want to force people to say that white supremacy is bad. So, I don't know. It's a mixed bag. Texas is a mixed bag. It's always a mixed bag. With that said, though, if you guys enjoyed this, let me know in the comment section below. Let me know over on Twitch if you haven't already. Hit the subscribe button or the follow button, depending on where you happen to be. If you want to support the channel, there's links in the description you can use. As always, though, everyone, insert end of video tagline here.